The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ridgeway's main street as Evelyn Carter stepped out of her rental car. Her military boots made no sound on the cracked sidewalk, a habit ingrained by years of training. At first glance, she looked like any other traveler passing through, a black leather jacket over a dark blue shirt, jeans that allowed for easy movement, and a simple gray backpack slung over one shoulder. But there was something in her stance, in the way her eyes scanned every corner, that set her apart from the few passers-by still lingering on the street. A dull ache pulsed through her left shoulder, making her adjust the backpack strap. The wound was still fresh. 3 months wasn't enough time to forget the searing pain of a bullet tearing through muscle and tissue. That mission, like so many others, would remain classified. Another scar, another story she couldn't tell. The town felt smaller than she remembered. 3 years of absence had changed things. Or maybe it was her own perspective that had shifted. The familiar storefronts of her childhood now wore shadows of neglect. Paint peeled from window frames, and too many for lease signs dotted the business district. Even the people seemed different, hurried, nervous, eyes downcast as they rushed past. Evelyn exhaled slowly as she approached Ridgeway Memorial Hospital. The weathered brick facade stood as a testament to decades of small-town medical care. The automatic doors wheezed open, releasing a blast of antiseptic-scented air that brought back memories, scraped knees, childhood mishaps, a mother's gentle touch. But today's visit wasn't about her. The reception area buzzed with quiet activity. A young mother tried to corral 2 energetic children while filling out forms. An elderly man dozed in a corner chair, an oxygen tank at his side. At the desk, a nurse looked up expectantly as Evelyn approached. "I'm looking for Margaret Carter," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. The nurse's fingers danced across the keyboard. "Room 412, she replied, then added with polite curiosity. "Are you family?" Evelyn nodded. Her daughter. The elevator hummed softly as it carried her to the 4th floor. She used the moment of solitude to center herself, to push down the guilt. Too many missed visits. Too many calls cut short by duties she couldn't explain. Her mother thought she was a military consultant, reviewing training protocols and writing reports. The lie tasted bitter, but it was better than the truth. Better than admitting her daughter led missions that didn't exist, took down threats that never officially happened. The corridor stretched before her, fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the pale green walls. Room 412. The door was half open. Through the gap, Evelyn saw her mother sitting up in bed, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, fingers tracing the lines in the book on her lap. "Mom." Margaret Carter's head snapped up, her face transforming with joy. "Evelyn, baby, you didn't tell me you were coming." She reached out with both arms, and Evelyn stepped into the embrace, careful of the IV line that snaked from her mother's arm to a gently beeping machine. "Thought I'd surprise you." Evelyn settled into the chair beside the bed, her trained eye automatically cataloging the room's features. Window overlooking the parking lot. 2 possible exit routes. Standard hospital security measures. Old habits died hard. "You look tired, baby," Margaret said, studying her daughter's face with maternal concern. "Those consultants working you too hard?" Evelyn forced a small smile. "Nothing I can't handle." She shifted slightly in her chair, suppressing a wince as her shoulder protested. "Tell me what the doctors are saying." For the next hour, they talked about treatments and progress, about the neighbors who brought casseroles, about everything except the worry lines around Margaret's eyes and the way her hospital gown hung loose on her frame. When a nurse came to check vitals, Evelyn used it as an excuse to step out, promising to return the next day. The walk through her old neighborhood felt like moving through a dream where everything was slightly wrong. Mitchell's General Store, once the neighborhood hub, where kids bought penny candy and adults gossiped over coffee, was boarded up. The basketball court where she'd spent countless afternoons was surrounded by new chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. A no loitering sign hung crookedly on the gate. But it was the people that troubled her most. Mrs. Thompson, who used to bring her cookies after school, hurried inside her house when she saw Evelyn approaching. 2 teenagers playing basketball stopped their game to watch her pass, their expressions wary. Even the air felt different, heavy with something unspoken, tension that hadn't been there before. Her next stop was Walker's Market. The family-owned grocery store that had been in Ridgeway for as long as she could remember. The interior was eerily quiet for a weekday afternoon. As she selected fruit from a display near the front, raised voices from the back caught her attention. "Officer Bradley, I told you, business has been slow. I can't afford another increase." Tom Walker's voice was hushed but desperate. The store owner sounded nothing like the jovial man who used to slip her extra candy as a child. "That's not how this works, Tom," came the low growl in response. "Sheriff Raines has been very patient. But patience has limits. You wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to this nice store of yours." Evelyn moved silently along the aisle, keeping casual movements while positioning herself to observe. Two uniformed officers stood uncomfortably close to Walker, who was backed against his office door. The older officer, Bradley, rested his hand meaningfully on his weapon while his younger partner scanned the store with predatory alertness. She deliberately knocked over a display of canned goods. The crash drew their attention. She made a show of clumsily gathering the cans. "I'm so sorry about that," she called out, giving the officers a clear view of her face. They exchanged glances. Bradley stepped back. "Think about what we discussed, Tom." Then they left. Walker's hands were shaking as he helped her pick up the last cans. "You don't have to do that, Miss Evelyn Carter," she introduced herself. Margaret Carter's daughter. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Little Evelyn? Lord, you've grown. How's your mama?" Before she could answer, the store's bell chimed. Another officer entered. This one was younger. Uniform crisp. Badge gleaming. The nameplate read Miller. "Ms. Carter," he greeted, his face lighting up with recognition. "I saw you speak at the Naval Academy last year. Your presentation on international maritime security was fascinating." Evelyn shook his offered hand, noting the genuine enthusiasm in his voice, while wondering what else he might know about her. "Always glad to meet someone interested in maritime security," she replied neutrally. "Are you in town long?" His question seemed innocent, but her instincts tingled. "Just visiting my mother." Through the store window, she spotted a black SUV idling across the street. It pulled away as soon as she looked at it. Something was wrong in Ridgeway, and she had just walked into the middle of it. Evelyn stepped out of Walker's Market, her senses on high alert. The black SUV that had been idling across the street was gone. But the unease in her gut remained. She hadn't been back in Ridgeway for more than a day. And already, she had walked into something much bigger than she expected. She made her way toward the Blue Plate Diner, a small, family-run establishment that had been a local favorite for decades. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside. The place was nearly empty, save for a couple of old-timers nursing their coffee and a waitress wiping down the counter. At a booth near the window, Naomi Jackson sat waiting. Naomi had been Evelyn's best friend since high school. They had been inseparable once, getting into trouble, sneaking out, dreaming about leaving Ridgeway behind. But Evelyn had left, and Naomi had stayed. Now, Naomi was an investigative journalist, and from the way she looked around before gesturing for Evelyn to sit, it was clear she knew something. "You should have told me you were coming home," Naomi said as they hugged briefly. "Last-minute decision," Evelyn replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "How's the reporting business?" Naomi glanced around the diner before leaning forward, lowering her voice. "Interesting. Too interesting." Evelyn studied her friend's face. "What's going on, Naomi?" Naomi hesitated, then said, "Do you remember Michael Ross? He used to write for the Ridgeway Herald." Evelyn nodded. "What about him?" "He was working on a story about missing persons cases. Young women, mostly. The police said they were runaways. But Michael thought there was more to it. He told me he was onto something big." Then, Naomi stirred her coffee, her spoon clinking against the ceramic. "He disappeared 3 months ago. Police say he moved to Chicago. But his apartment is still full of his stuff. His car is still in town. His cat was there, half-starved, when the landlord finally checked." Evelyn felt a chill creep up her spine. "And the police? They don't care. Or they're in on it." Naomi shook her head. "People are scared, Evelyn. The police are everywhere. But nobody feels safe. Small businesses are closing because they can't afford the protection fees. And anyone who asks too many questions disappears. Like Michael. Like Michael." The waitress approached, and they paused their conversation to order. Once she walked away, Naomi leaned in again, I think it's bigger than just a corrupt sheriff shaking down businesses. I think they're trafficking people. Evelyn's stomach tightened. The black SUV. The nervous townspeople. The police extorting business owners. Naomi's words fit together too well. Today at Walker's Market, Evelyn said, I saw 2 officers threatening Tom Walker. He looked terrified. Naomi nodded. They call it a security fee. If you don't pay, bad things start happening. Evelyn drummed her fingers on the table. Sheriff James Raines. How deep is he in this? All the way, Naomi said grimly. He's not just taking bribes, he's running this thing. And he's got connections. Federal grants. Extra funding. Officially, it's for crime prevention initiatives. And officially, it's funding a damn trafficking ring. Evelyn exhaled sharply, thinking through her next move. I need more information. A pattern. Places they use. The people involved. Naomi tapped a folder she had brought with her. I've been collecting evidence. Names. Locations. Financial transactions. Enough to make them sweat. But not enough to bring them down. Evelyn picked up the folder. Flipping through photos. Receipts. And notes. Then we find more. Naomi hesitated. Evelyn, you need to be careful. These people don't play games. Evelyn smiled. But there was no humor in it. Neither do I. Evelyn didn't waste time. That night, she met Ethan Brooks at Roosevelt Park. A former JAG colleague who had traded his uniform for a suit. But his posture was still military precise as he fell into step beside her on the walking path. Thanks for meeting me, Evelyn said. Anything for my favorite seal. Ethan replied, though his attempt at humor fell flat. I looked into what you asked about. Property records are interesting. In the last 2 years, half the commercial real estate in town has changed hands. All bought by shell companies. Offshore accounts. Money laundering among other things. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Sheriff Raines? He's just one piece of it. Ethan said. His department got a budget increase of 300%. Officially from federal grants. And officially? He handed her a USB drive. Be careful with this, Evelyn. And watch your back. That SUV that followed you from Walker's? It's been circling the park for the last 10 minutes. Evelyn didn't turn to look. Instead, she whispered. Noted. Any other friendly faces I should know about? Deputy Miller has been asking questions about you. Wanted to know your security clearance level. He's only been on the force for a year. But he's already deep in Raines' inner circle. Before Evelyn could respond, a commotion near the park's entrance caught her attention. A teenage girl, no older than 15, burst from behind the gas station. Terror etched on her face. 2 men in dark clothes grabbed her arms, trying to drag her toward a white van with tinted windows. Evelyn's body tensed, combat instincts firing. The girl's eyes met hers across the darkening park, pleading. Desperate. There was no hesitation. Evelyn moved. 3 steps. The first man never saw her coming. She struck his throat in a precise, brutal chop, sending him crumpling to the ground. The second man released his grip on the girl, reaching for a weapon. Evelyn's fist connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. Run, she whispered to the girl. But the teenager stood frozen, trembling. They have Elena, she sobbed. My sister. They took her 2 weeks ago. Please help her. Before Evelyn could respond, blinding lights flooded the area. Police cruisers screamed into the parking lot from 2 directions. Sirens wailing. The vehicles boxed them in with practiced precision. Hands where we can see them. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Evelyn slowly raised her hands, positioning herself between the girl and the police cars. Doors slammed. Boots crunched on broken asphalt. Sheriff James Raines emerged from the lead vehicle, his bulk casting a long shadow in the cruiser's headlights. Well, he drawled, pale face twisting into a smirk. What do we have here? Evelyn met his gaze, unwavering. These men were attempting to kidnap this girl. Raines' smirk widened. He glanced at the fallen kidnappers, then at his officers. Looks more like assault to me. One of his men, Sergeant Frank Hawkins, stepped forward, yanking the teenager away. No, the girl screamed. They were hurting me. Hawkins ignored her. Your parents reported you missing an hour ago. Kid, said you were running around with bad influences. That's not true, she sobbed. Raines ignored her protests and turned back to Evelyn. Miss Carter, he said smoothly, visiting your sick mother. Are you? What a shame you had to go and get yourself arrested. Evelyn said nothing. She smiled. A slow, Dangerous smile. And Rains had no idea that was the last mistake he would ever make. Evelyn knew she could fight them. Take down Hawkins. Disable Rains. Disappear into the night. But that wouldn't get her the answer she needed. So she let Hawkins wrench her arms behind her back, snapping on the cuffs just a little too tight. Careful with those. Rains sneered. I hear our guest has a bad shoulder. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. But her mind was already racing. They were taking her in. Which meant she'd get a look inside their operation firsthand. She could work with that. The girl was still struggling against the officer holding her. Please, don't let them take me back. They took my sister. They took Elena. Rains turned to a female officer. Take her home. Make sure her parents understand the importance of proper supervision. Evelyn watched as the girl was dragged away. Her terrified eyes locked onto hers until she was shoved into a patrol car. Meanwhile, the two men she had taken down were already being helped to their feet by officers. No handcuffs. No questions. They weren't suspects. They were protected. Rains stepped closer, his bulk towering over her. You should have stayed out of this. Carter. Evelyn held his gaze, voice even. You have no idea what you've just started. Rains just chuckled. Take her in. The ride to the Ridgeway police station was short but tense. The officer driving didn't speak. And Hawkins, who sat beside her in the back, didn't bother to hide his smug grin. Inside, she was marched past the front desk, down a long hallway, and straight into a holding cell. It was small, concrete walls. A single metal bench. No windows. Welcome home. Hawkins sneered as he shoved her inside. The door slammed shut behind her, the lock clicking into place. Evelyn sat on the bench, rolling her shoulders slightly to test the cuffs. Too tight, but not impossible. She'd been in worse situations before. This was just another battlefield. Different location. Same fight. She leaned back against the cold wall, closed her eyes, and started thinking 3 steps ahead. Hours passed. Somewhere in the station, she heard Naomi's voice raised in protest, followed by silence. They had taken Naomi too. That meant they were worried. They wouldn't have brought her in otherwise. Around midnight, a young officer brought water and a stale sandwich. He avoided eye contact as he passed it through the slot. But Evelyn caught the name on his badge, Jenkins. His hands were shaking slightly. Not everyone on Rains' force was fully committed to the corruption. Officer Jenkins, she said softly as he turned to leave. He hesitated. I'm not supposed to talk to you. Evelyn kept her voice calm. The Williams girl, Elena, how long has she been missing? Jenkins swallowed hard. I don't know. You do, she pressed. You just don't want to say it. He glanced over his shoulder, lowering his voice. We don't talk about it. It's not safe. How many others? She asked. He clenched his jaw, but before he could answer, a voice barked down the hall. Jenkins, move it. The young officer flinched and hurried away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Evelyn let out a slow breath. There was something bigger at play here, and she had just gotten her first real lead. Hours later, the sound of heavy boots approached. The cell door opened. Rains stood in the doorway, flanked by Hawkins and another officer. You had your fun, Carter, Rains said, stepping inside. But I think it's time we get to the part where you realize you made a mistake. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. That's so? Oh yeah. Rains grinned. He pulled out a small plastic bag containing white powder. Look what we found in your rental car. That's not mine. They all say that. Rains chuckled. You're looking at drug possession, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. You're gonna be real busy explaining all that to a judge, if you even make it that far. Evelyn said nothing. She could see it now. Rains thought he had control, thought he had her cornered. But he didn't. Not even close. Hawkins stepped forward with a pair of zip ties. Time for transport. Where are we going? Evelyn asked. Rains smirked. County jail. Or maybe you just disappear before you get there. That was confirmation enough. They weren't taking her to county. They were taking her somewhere no one would find her. At least, that's what they thought. The transport van rumbled down an old, back road. Evelyn knew Ridgeway well enough to know this wasn't the route to the county jail. They were taking the scenic route. The 2 deputies sitting across from her were silent. But their body language told her everything. Too stiff. Too alert. Not real cops. Hired muscle. The driver, Bradley, the officer from Walker's Market, grinned at her through the rearview mirror. Taking the long way? she asked casually. Bradley chuckled. Something like that. She took in every detail. Every movement. Every potential opening. The van hit a pothole. And one of the deputies reached for balance, revealing something interesting. A tattoo on his wrist. Barely visible beneath his sleeve. Evelyn recognized the mark. Private military contractor. That answered another question. This wasn't just a small-town corruption ring. Someone much bigger was involved. She relaxed her posture slightly, letting her body shift with the movement of the van. They thought they had her trapped. She smiled. They were wrong. When the van slowed for a sharp bend, Evelyn moved. She snapped her wrists apart, breaking the zip ties using a technique she'd learned in SEAL training. Before the deputy on her left could react, she drove her elbow into his throat, cutting off his air. He collapsed, gasping. The second deputy reached for his gun. Too slow. Evelyn grabbed his wrist, twisted it at a brutal angle, and forced the weapon free. By the time Bradley realized what was happening, she was already on him. The van swerved as he fought to regain control. Evelyn pressed the barrel of the stolen gun to the back of his head. Pull over. Bradley's hands tightened on the wheel. Now, she said, voice cold. The van skidded to a stop on the dirt road. Out, she ordered. Bradley hesitated. Evelyn cocked the gun. Slowly, he stepped out, hands raised. You don't know what you're getting into. He sneered. This thing is bigger than you. Evelyn stepped out after him, keeping the gun trained. I know exactly what I'm getting into. You think you can stop this? Bradley laughed. You don't even know who you're dealing with. Then tell me, Evelyn said. Bradley just smiled. Go ahead, kill me. Won't change a damn thing. Evelyn didn't blink. Oh, I'm not going to kill you. She stepped forward, closing the distance. I'm going to burn your whole operation to the ground. Bradley's smirk faltered. Evelyn grabbed his radio off his belt. Deputy Miller, she said into the receiver. Voice calm. This is Evelyn Carter. There was a pause. Then static. Then Miller's voice. Sharp. Carter? How the hell? I'll see you soon, she said. Then she smashed the radio against the van. Bradley stared at her. You just signed your death warrant, he whispered. Evelyn smiled. Funny, I was just about to say the same to you. Then she turned and walked into the woods. The war for Ridgeway had just begun, and she was going to win. Evelyn moved through the dense woods, her senses sharp. She had trained for situations far worse than this: extractions, hostile environments, evasion tactics. Ridgeway's forests were nothing compared to the jungles she had operated in overseas. She didn't need maps. She had grown up here. Bradley had given her more than he realized. The fear in his eyes, the way he had tried to play tough, it told her everything. Raines and his crew were scared. They had taken down people before. Buried bodies, erased stories. But she was different. She wasn't just some civilian who had stumbled into their operation. She was a problem. And the thing about problems was, when the wrong people tried to erase them, they tended to push back hard. She needed to regroup. Ethan, Naomi, they were the key. She moved west through the woods, avoiding the main roads. She knew exactly where she was going, the safe house. It wasn't just any place. It was an old hunting cabin, one Ethan's family had owned for years, tucked into the hills just outside Ridgeway. Isolated, secure. It would do. She covered the 3 miles in just under an hour, her body moving on muscle memory despite the lingering ache in her shoulder. By the time she reached the cabin, she saw the faint glow of lights inside. Good. She knocked in a specific pattern, 3 short taps. A pause. Then 2 more. A few seconds passed. Then the door cracked open. Ethan's face appeared in the dim light. He took one look at her and swore under his breath. Jesus. Evie, he muttered, pulling the door open wider. You're supposed to be in jail. Plans change, she said, stepping inside. The cabin was small but functional. A single room with a fireplace, a table covered in papers and laptop screens, and a few chairs. Naomi sat at the table, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of her screen. She looked up. Relief flashed across her face. You're alive, Naomi breathed. Evelyn gave her a small smirk. Disappointed? Naomi let out a breathless laugh. Hell number. But you scared the crap out of me. Ethan locked the door behind her, his expression shifting into something more serious. What happened? Raines is dirty. We already knew that, Evelyn said. rolling her shoulder. But this is bigger than just him. They're running something big. Human trafficking, money laundering, weapons. Everything points to something way beyond Ridgeway. Ethan nodded. I've been tracking financial records. Whoever is backing Rains has serious resources. We're talking shell companies, offshore accounts, political cover. This isn't just some small-town corruption case. Naomi leaned forward. And there's more. Before they grabbed me, I uploaded everything I had to an encrypted cloud server. Names, transactions, locations. But it's still not enough. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. We need evidence that no one can ignore. Something they can't bury. Ethan sighed. That's the hard part. They control everything. The police, the courts, even some of the media. If we go public too soon, they'll spin it, bury it, and we'll be the ones getting blamed. Then we hit them where it hurts. Evelyn said. We go after their operations. We get the evidence. Naomi hesitated. That's not exactly legal. Evelyn smiled. Neither is trafficking people. But here we are. Ethan exhaled. All right, what's the plan? Evelyn turned to the laptop screens, scanning the information Naomi had gathered. We start with the lumber mill. Naomi frowned. You think they're using it? Evelyn nodded. Bradley let something slip. They have a facility, somewhere close. And I remember hearing about the old lumber mill being bought up by some unknown investors last year. No one's seen anything go in or out since. Ethan pulled up the property records on his laptop. Confirmed. The mill was purchased through a shell company linked to Coastal Dynamics. Naomi's eyes widened. That's one of the companies tied to the offshore accounts. Evelyn smirked. Then I think we just found their warehouse. The lumber mill sat on the outskirts of Ridgeway, a looming structure of rusted steel and rotting wood. But there was nothing abandoned about it. Evelyn watched through her scope from a ridge about 200 meters away. Spotlights illuminated the perimeter. Armed guards patrolled the main entrance. No civilians. No signs of normal business operations. It was a front. Ethan's voice crackled in her earpiece. Security count. 14 visible operators. Likely ex-military. Body armor. Semi-automatics. Radio comms. These aren't rent-a-cops. Naomi's voice joined in. I ran thermal scans through the drone. There's at least a dozen people inside. Could be workers. Could be hostages. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Elena Williams could be one of them. She exhaled slowly. All right, we go in quiet. No unnecessary casualties. We get the evidence. Secure the hostages. And get out. Ethan spoke. And if things go loud? Evelyn smirked. Then we improvise. She and Ethan moved through the trees, staying in the shadows. Naomi guided them through earpieces, feeding them guard rotations and security gaps. Okay, Naomi whispered. You have a 60-second window before the next guard makes his round. Go. They slipped through the fence, moving fast and low. Inside, the mill was active. Cargo crates were stacked high, marked with foreign shipping labels. A semi-truck was backed up to a loading dock. Men in tactical gear moving boxes inside. Evelyn's gut twisted. They were preparing a shipment. She crouched near a steel support beam, her eyes scanning for an entrance to the main office. That was where they'd keep records, manifests, hard drives, proof. Ethan tapped her shoulder. He gestured toward a side door. They moved. Inside, the air was stale. Stacks of ledgers and computer monitors flickered under dim lighting. And then Evelyn saw it. A cage. 6 women sat inside, bound and gagged. Her jaw clenched. This is it. She reached for her radio. Naomi, get ready to pull every file from their system. We just found our smoking gun. Ethan was already moving toward the cage, cutting restraints. One of the girls looked up, eyes wide with fear. Who are you? Evelyn knelt beside her. I'm getting you out. The girl started sobbing. They have more. Not just here. They move us through different places. I heard them talking about a shipment tonight. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Where? A private airfield. Midnight. Ethan swore under his breath. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Naomi, we need to move. Now. But before Naomi could respond, a voice echoed from behind them. Well. Evelyn turned slowly. Sheriff Rains stood in the doorway, gun in hand. Behind him, 5 armed men stepped forward. You really should have stayed out of this. Carter. Evelyn didn't flinch. She smiled. Because she had just the right amount of bullets to end this. And no intention of staying quiet. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She moved. Before Rains could squeeze the trigger, she grabbed a metal clipboard from the nearby desk and threw it. It struck his wrist with a sickening crack. The gun went off, the shot slamming into the wall behind her. Chaos erupted. Ethan dove for cover, pulling one of the rescued women with him. The armed men opened fire. Evelyn moved fast, rolling behind a steel support beam as bullets ripped through old wood and metal. "Naomi," she hissed into her earpiece. "We're compromised. Send it, now." "Already on it." Naomi's voice was tight, pulling everything from their servers. "You need to get out." "Working on it," Evelyn muttered. Ethan fired from behind an overturned crate, dropping two of the gunmen. Rains, clutching his injured wrist, stumbled backward, barking orders. "Kill them, now." Evelyn grabbed a fallen submachine gun, its previous owner lying in a heap on the floor. She aimed. 2 quick bursts. Another enemy dropped. Ethan moved toward the cage, getting the last woman free. "We need an exit." Evelyn scanned the room. Back doors were locked. Front entrance was a death trap. Then she spotted it, a loading crane overhead. She grabbed her radio. "Naomi, how much time?" 60 seconds until a full data wipe. Then I'm cutting the power. Make it 30. Evelyn bolted toward the wall-mounted control panel, dodging gunfire. One of the guards tried to intercept. She kicked his knee inward, grabbed his head, and slammed it into the crate beside them. He crumpled. "Cover me," she shouted at Ethan. Ethan fired 3 precise shots, forcing Rains and his remaining men into cover. Evelyn reached the control panel and slammed the switch. The overhead crane rumbled to life, its giant steel pallets swinging free. She grabbed the radio. "Naomi, cut it." The power died. Everything plunged into darkness. For 2 full seconds, silence. Then, gunfire erupted again. Blind shots in the dark. Evelyn switched on night vision mode on her tactical goggles. She saw Rains fumbling toward the exit. She wasn't about to let that happen. She moved. Fast. Silent. She reached him just as he made it to the doorway, grabbed his collar, and slammed him against the frame. Rains gasped as she pressed the muzzle of her stolen gun to his ribs. "You're done," she whispered. But before she could pull the trigger, another shot rang out. Not from her. Not from Ethan. Rains' body jerked. A bullet tore through his chest. His eyes widened in shock. He collapsed. Behind him, Deputy Miller stood in the open doorway, lowering his smoking gun. Evelyn didn't lower hers. "Explain," she ordered. Miller swallowed, gun still in hand. "I had no choice." "You always have a choice." Miller shook his head. "Not in this town." Evelyn scanned his face. She saw fear, regret, but also resolve. Miller glanced at Rains' body. "He was going to kill you. And then he was going to kill me. I decided to go with the option that lets me sleep at night." Ethan approached cautiously, his weapon still raised. "So what now?" Miller exhaled. "Now we clean up this mess." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "And you expect me to trust you?" "No," Miller admitted, "but I expect you to let me help." Naomi's voice crackled in her ear. "All files are uploaded. We have names, transactions, offshore accounts. We just blew this thing wide open." Evelyn nodded. "Then let's finish it." Miller didn't waste time. "I can get you access to the station," he said. "If we hit them now, we catch them while they're still scrambling." Evelyn considered it. "What about the airfield?" "Leave that to the FBI." Naomi cut in. "I sent the data to my contacts. They'll move in before the shipment leaves." Ethan checked his weapon. "Then Ridgeway's station is our next stop." Miller led the way, taking Rains' keys from his body and pulling a police cruiser around. Evelyn slid into the passenger seat, Ethan and Naomi taking the back. "You realize we're about to declare war on an entire corrupt police department?" Ethan muttered. Evelyn smirked. "That was always the plan." They drove fast, cutting through Ridgeway's empty streets. Miller kept his eyes on the road. "Most of the officers are dirty. But some aren't. If we move fast, we can flip them before they're forced to pick a side." Evelyn nodded. "Then we hit hard and don't stop." The police station was in chaos. Officers were arguing, some packing files, some shredding evidence. They were scrambling, trying to save themselves. Miller pulled the cruiser up to the entrance. Evelyn stepped out, gun raised. "Everyone, down." The room froze. Guns were drawn. Officers whipped around, some reaching for their weapons. Miller shouted first. "Stand down," he barked. Confusion rippled through the officers. Then Evelyn threw a file onto the front desk. It slid across the wood. Naomi had printed it, full names, bank transactions, proof of every dirty cop in the department. "Your boss is dead," Evelyn said, voice cold. "FBI is on their way. Your best option is to surrender." The room tensed. And then, some officers started lowering their guns. Not all of them, but some. Then one, Sergeant Davis, a cop Evelyn recognized from childhood, dropped his gun entirely. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered. That was the breaking point. Other officers hesitated. More guns were lowered, but not all of them. "Traitors," Hawkins shouted, stepping out of the back office. He had his gun raised. Evelyn moved first. 2 shots. Hawkins collapsed, his weapon skidding across the floor. Silence. And then Davis turned to the rest of the officers. "We're done here." And just like that, it was over. FBI agents stormed the airfield at midnight. They intercepted the shipment, rescued 12 missing women, arrested multiple Black Star operatives, private military contractors working with the traffickers. The data Naomi leaked to the press spread like wildfire. National headlines, federal investigations. By sunrise, Ridgeway was no longer the town that buried its secrets. It was the town that fought back and won. 3 days later, Evelyn stood at the edge of Ridgeway's Main Street. The town was different. Not perfect, but different. Sheriff Raines was dead. His operation dismantled. Miller had been placed in temporary command, working with federal agents to rebuild the department from the ground up. Naomi had been offered a national exclusive. She had turned it down. "Someone needs to stay and make sure this place doesn't slip back into the shadows," she had said. Ethan had received an offer from Washington. He was considering it. And Evelyn? She watched the sun rise. A new day. A clean slate. But she knew one thing for sure. There were other towns. Other Ridgeways. Other Raines. And she wasn't done yet. Not even close.